I think nostalgia. You're right. Nostalgia is a big part, and also having that that possibility. Like I feel like Batman's one of those. If I were going to place money on characters that are still going to be here Odysseus style long after all my stuff's forgotten, I'd put some money on Batman.
Yeah, I would too.
Stance.
Yeah. And Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, like the big three, the Trinity.
I hope so.
Of DC.
For all I know, what 200-300 years from now, hopefully not since the advent of video, but who knows? Maybe they'll think we believed in them. They're like, oh yeah, they just have Batman figures because he liked Batman. This was his god. He worshipped it. It could be that all those Greeks were just that was just their heroes, and they had action figures, and that was it.
I would love to know that the Greeks actually played with like ceramic versions of Odysseus and all the characters from the Iliad and Paris and all those guys, and like reenacted the Trojan War, and they had like little wooden Trojan horses like they pushed around when they were kids, and they were like collectible, right? And you're like, oh, I got this super rare Achilles, right, with the removable heel.
As you got older, you would be searching ancient eBay for that Achilles you had as a child. Sure.
$400 for it, even though it was only $2 when you had it.
Why did I let my mom throw out my Achilles?
There's probably a good short story in that somewhere, I would think.
Yeah, you're welcome to it. I would love to read it. I imagine if you go back, they probably had like little, how the action figures a lot of times they'll have like squeeze their legs and their arms move, or they got a little button on them. Mm-hmm. Probably some of those pots and things had some secret, some actions. But
yeah, that'd be cool. Yeah, a little custom, like we have the collectible cards, right? You got Pokemon and Digimon and all those things. They had to have like coins, right? That were very rare. Like, did you get the Caesar, with the, his head already cut off or whatever? I don't know.
Yeah, I really need to have this whatever, but I can't part with my headless Caesar.
Right, exactly.
If I had one of the older ones. But this is my
version.
Hanging on to this.
Well, I always said that actually I would know that I really made it as an author when one of my characters had been turned into an action figure. And as of yet, it hasn't happened. I think in large part because, it has to have a film adaptation in order to justify that kind of marketing. But that's got to be a stepping stone, right?
I think if you got like a graphic novel adaptation, you might have at least a shot at an action figure.
Yeah, that would be cool.
Definitely probably some kind of visual representation. Although I think I had a Harry Potter action figure before they cast Daniel Radcliffe. I can't remember for sure.
Okay, interesting.
It wasn't an action figure, but it was like a doll that was very, it looked like the character.
Right, yeah. Or Funko, get your little Pops guy. Did they have action figures of authors? I had an Edgar Allan Poe at one time.
Well, I know with the Funkos, you can get your own Funkos made. So, like a lot of the times, the Funkos that get sold in the store are somebody funded that. That's part of a publicity campaign. Hey, make sure you offer that, and we'll cover part of the price, so you won't take a loss on it. Just make sure it's there in the store.
Nice, yeah.
And who knows which is which, because nobody wants to admit that. Yeah, that was my vanity Funko.
Right, exactly. I want to be buried with that.
Once in a while, when I see a character that's like, who would buy that? No one's buying it. I think that must be the vanity one.
Good stuff.
Well, I know I've seen author action figure. I know I saw a Stephen King action figure once for sure. But that's the problem. Both, I think, the good thing and the bad thing about maybe being a famous author. It's like when I talked to Hugh Howey, who I would think would be a really famous author, maybe the problem is I talked to him before the Wool TV show comes out, and he's about to become really through the stratosphere famous. But, he was able to walk around, no problem. People didn't necessarily recognize him. He wasn't accosted. He was still going to the store, no problem. I would think if you're George R.R. Martin, though, and especially if you wear his little conductor hat or whatever, you have to like a wig and maybe some eye makeup. And
he's cultivated an image. So I think most of the authors that I know and love Until I actually flipped to the back of the book enough times, I wouldn't have recognized them on the street, right? But I mean, the internet obviously changes all of that too. So everybody's a lot more visible now than they used to be. Oh well.
Good and for real, I think.
Yeah.
There have been authors whose Twitter, like I love their book, and then I followed their Twitter account. Like, oh, I like you less now. I should have just read your book, and you would have remained a mystery to me, and it would have been great. Whereas I know if Roald Dahl came to my house, like first of all, he would leave immediately because it's an interracial family. But even if he stayed past that, he's going to say some really offensive, terrible things, and I'm going to not like him probably by the time we're done. Right. But since that can never happen until the afterlife or whatever, I can go on just imagining he was some nice cartoon version.
Ignorance is bliss for sure.
Well, I'll tell you what, this has been good enough. Why don't we just call this the start of the show?
Okay. That's fine. Yeah. All right, cool. I didn't know. I was waiting for, like the this is blah, 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 and here's your host.
So this is, I'm very excited, esteemed audience. Hi. My guest is John David Anderson, who you probably know already. John David Anderson, tell esteemed audience a little bit about yourself.
Well, I live in Indianapolis, Indiana. I am a Hoosier, just like you, Rob, which is it's actually cool. I actually like Indianapolis. It's like mini Chicago, right? And only 3 hours from Chicago if you need to go catch a Cubs game. Big Cubs fan myself. Let's see. A few things about me. I'm addicted to chocolate, root beer, Diet Coke, lots of things that aren't good for me. I'm also addicted to hiking, biking, some things that are good for me. Reading books, obviously. That's a big one. Born and raised here, taught at the University of Illinois for 7 years, where I taught literature and, freshman composition, which probably taught me more about writing than anything else that I've ever done. Trying to teach somebody else how to write is a big learning experience for you, right? Because for the most part, I had no idea how I did what I did. But then having to stop and explain it, and then, sort of coach other people through that evolution, did a lot for my own personal evolution as a writer. I have 2 kids who are awesome and wonderful. They're 16-year-old twins. I have a cat named Smudge, who really is just named Kitty because nobody can ever remember to call her by her real name. It's always just Kitty, do this, Kitty, come here, Kitty, don't eat that, right? Kitty, don't pee there, whatever it is. And she's awesome, beautiful wife that I've been married to for 24 years now. The big 2-5, comes along next summer. We got to figure out where we're going. Hopefully it'll be safe to travel by that point, but we'll see. What else? Published 10 novels. I've got an 11th one coming out next month, and then I have a 12th one coming out next winter. And they kind of run the gamut. I published books about superheroes and, bullying and fairies and funerals, which are funerals, but a lot more fun, and teachers who have stage 4 pancreatic cancer, and you name it. And now science fiction and then a ghost story. So I'm kind of all over the board, but I always write for young readers between the ages of 8 and 14. And I think the reason I do that is because, A, I feel like we need to tap into the most tragic moments in our lives. And that was definitely it, right? If I'm like, I want to get to some drama that's deep down in the core of me, then I kind of have to go to middle school. But B, I think in a lot of ways, they are really the most astute, awesome readers because they come to it with a child's imagination, right? Where like anything is possible. The suspension of disbelief, full gear. You can get away with a lot of stuff. They have great senses of humor, right? Because they still love your potty jokes, but at the same time, they get your sophisticated Simpsons references, right? But even cooler than all that is like your 11, 12-year-old reader is really starting to question some things. Some of the things that they've been taught, some of the things they've been led to believe. And that's where fiction, right, where storytelling really can open up space for them to delve and explore and try out new ideas, and maybe consider their identity and their place in the world. And so that's kind of why I fell in love with that particular genre, and I've been writing it ever since.
So, lots of follow-up questions on that, but good news, we have time.
Yeah.
Let's start with the long list of all the different genres you've hit within middle grade. Do you have like a bingo card where you're crossing them off as you go, or like a bucket list of things you still want to tackle? Is there a genre you haven't hit yet that you've got a candy craving for?
I love that you put it that way, because I think that's actually it. Especially for the last 5 or 6 years, when I've sat down, with the impetus, like time to produce another book, that's kind of the first thing I go to is what haven't I done yet? And I think part of that is, insecurity, and that I'm assuming I've screwed everything up so far. And so maybe if I try something new, this will be the thing that I actually managed to pull off with aplomb. I don't think it's happened yet. But then part of it is also like, I don't want to get in a rut. I don't want to bore myself. And the easiest way for me to stay challenged and stay invested in a writing project is to play with a whole new set of conventions, right? And so, you got science fiction. Well, all of a sudden there's all new parameters that I've got to work with as an author. And there's this, entire canon of work that I get to build off and play off of. And that's a lot of fun. It's also very intimidating. Especially with some genres over others. But then there's also, for me, there's a balancing act in my own life between switching from speculative fiction and realistic fiction. Probably because my realistic fiction sells a lot better than my speculative fiction. So when I have to eat, I write a realistic novel. And when I want to have some more fun, I write, science fiction or fantasy or superheroes or something like that. But it's cool. Like I love going back and forth with those. I like experimenting, with first person versus third person narration. And so every time I sit down with a particular book, it's always with the investment to try something new for me as an author. It's never necessarily what I think the reader is going to want. And then hopefully, by the time I get done with it and it gets published, I turn it into something that the reader wants. But that was really never what I set out to do to begin with.
Just a happy accident along the way.
I mean, I do feel like there's enough readers out there that you'll find 3 or 4. They're like, yeah, we really wanted a sports novel about putt-putt. We've been looking for this thing, right? And it's never come to fruition until right now. John David Anderson, thank you very much. Now give me my Achilles action figure.
That's the last shot available now. And of course, the new book is Stowaway, which was going to release later in August, but I saw is now August 3rd, I guess. So we'll have just come out, I think, when a Steamed audience gets their hot little hands on this.
Sweet. You know more about it than I do.
I saw that, and I wondered, and maybe this will be something we cut out at the show, but I wondered when something like that happens, because I think that it was maybe the 16th that was going to come out, because I reserved the 14th to line up with your launch date, because I told you I always give top priority to Hoosier authors. A Steamed audience knows I'm on a mission to spread a love of reading and literature across the world, but I'm focused on Indiana because I live here. And if I don't reach Texas, well, that's too bad. I would love Texas to have a love of reading and literature, but let's get Indiana first, and if there's time, Texas. Anyway, so I wondered, August 16th was the plan. Now August 3rd, probably firm, going to come out. That's not that far off, but does that kind of screw up the launch plans for you and things that you had planned to do to promote the book when it comes out? Or are you flexible enough and used to it at this point?
Different books obviously have different plans. And for this book, it was a fairly, modest launch. For me, anyways, there wasn't a whole lot of work that I had to do. Harper's doing all the work on their end, which is nice. I get to, have this lovely interview, and a couple more things are lined up. But I used to always have a launch party at Kids Inc., which is a bookstore that I'm sure you know and love. here in Indianapolis, and I don't think we're having it this year, and we didn't have it last year, obviously because of COVID and the pandemic. And I'm still, still just slightly nervous about large gatherings in very small spaces. So my hope is,
they have to wear a mask anymore, and they have never been wrong the entire time or contradicted anything they had previously said. So I don't know why you would be nervous.
Right? Yeah, you never. So yeah, I mean, I'm sure if you are a big name author and your book tour was scheduled for the 16th, and all of a sudden your plane tickets have been changed to the 3rd, then that's really going to put a crimp in your plans. But for me, I this is going to sound terrible. I wrote Stowaway 2.5, 3 years ago, first draft. Then the revision process and the printing process and all of that. And so by this point, not only is that like 4 novels ago, in terms of my like artistic process, but it's also 4 novels in a pandemic ago. And so I'm just playing catch up. Like, I'm like, who are the characters in that book again? Now it's been useful because the book is actually part of a duology. And so there is an anticipated sequel that I've been working on. So that's forced me to sort of get back into the groove with it. But yeah, and in terms of launch plans, I hope it gets to the readers that it needs to get to. I hope it certainly gets to the schools and the librarians. I think there is a little bit of a gap for good science fiction in middle grade. I mean, there's great stuff out there for sure, but I think it's definitely not a genre that we've fully, exploited. And there's got to be, I fear there's got to be readership for it, right? People who have been weaned on new Star Wars and Guardians of the Galaxy and, Maze Runner and all these wonderful other sort of sci-fi and dystopia things. They're ready, for more. So, yeah, I put my faith in readers, and I put my faith in the power of books and literature. And once it hits the shelf, I'm kind of like, fly away, little bird, go find your home, right? Do the best you can. I have more birds to make.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Although I think that the sci-fi market, for anybody who's listening to this after August 3rd, has now been cornered by Stowaway, by John David Anderson. It's over. You had a window.
Done, right? There will never be another science fiction book written until August 4th. I guarantee it, right?
So so you're working on the sequel right now as you're promoting the first book? Did it work out that way?
Yeah, it did work out that way. I have a book that's coming in between, which is called Riley's Ghost, which is, surprise, spoiler alert, it's a ghost story. Kind of like a very middle grade version of, Haunting of Hill House, ghost story set in a middle school. So that was a welcome break. And I do think as a writer, like, that's incredibly important. I could not have written, the sequel to Stowaway directly after writing Stowaway without giving my brain a breather. So, that came in between, and then back to this. And I'm also, working on 2 or 3 other things. I don't know if you're the same way, Rob, whether you're like, you hyper focus on one project and you just go at it until you get it done. Or you dabble here, you dabble there, 2 weeks on this, 3 weeks on that. Obviously, the publishing process in and of itself forces you to be able to shift gears, right, on a moment's notice when, the revision of this comes in, or time to proofread that or whatever. But that's kind of the way that I work best. My attention span is not long enough to stay in the science fiction world for too long.
Well, it's while you're in the zone, while you're working on the sequel, what does the esteemed audience need to know about Stowaway so that they go to kidsinc.com and purchase their copy right now?
Wow. What do you need to know about it?
Or do a search for Shirley Mullen, but I'm 90% certain that it's kidsinc.com.
It is kidsinc.com for sure. Yeah, we're good there. Yeah, so what do you need to know about it? I can tell you that in the first chapter, I'll go ahead and give this away. Our main character, whose name is Leo Fender, He has a brother named Gareth. He has a dad who is an esteemed scientist. This is post First Contact. So the Earth has already made contact with a particular alien species, which has brought them all kinds of wonderful new technology, which you need, right? If you're going to have a spacefaring adventure, you need to be able to explain it somehow. And I'm like, aliens, right? That's always a good way to explain it. They know all kinds of stuff that we don't know. So they bring it and kind of, open our eyes and revolutionize our world, but at a cost. All these things, of course, come at a cost. And one of the things that they bring with them is a war, not with us, but with another alien force, right? That they've been in sort of mortal combat with now for eons and eons. And getting sucked up into that war then becomes one of humanity's sort of most unavoidable pitfalls. It's inevitable. And so the novel opens with that war sort of in full-fledged in our participation in it. And the ship that Leo's on gets, torpedoed and it's stranded there, and some pirates show up and they're awesome. It's a band of these 4 characters. The pirate captain, of course, he's just everything that you'd expect, right? He's got his Grateful Dead t-shirts. He refuses to let go of his humanity's past, and he's sarcastic and slick and Han Solo-ish, but at the same time sort of bumbling in endearing and not so endearing ways. And his first mate, right, who barely puts up with him, Katarina Korea, who is equally awesome, right? Got a cool bionic arm for those of you who like, bionic arms. How can you go wrong with one of those? And then you got Boo, big, hairy 4 arms, sweet, pretty much wears his bathrobe everywhere, kind of not interested in most of the pirating gig. But he's sort of fallen in love with this little family and sort of sworn to protect them. And then you have the one robot, right, that they keep around, whose personality matrix has kind of gotten caught in her teenage years. And so there's a lot of drama in her robotic life, right? Her name is Skits. And so Leo gets caught up, as the novel suggests, as a stowaway with these 4 pirates. And what ensues is an action-packed, spaceship blasting, hyperspace traveling adventure where Leo has to convince these people who are not exactly on the most righteous side of the moral continuum to help him save his family. And in the backdrop, there's environmental concerns, and there's questions about misuses of technology, and there's family tragedy and grief that Leo has to go through. And there's just a lot of questions about stewardship, right? Not just of our planet, but of the entire universe. Like, what happens when you get the power to make the universe a better place, but you choose not to use it in your own sort of selfish interests? And so there's some pretty big questions, I think, that the novel at least introduces, even if it can't come up with some clear-cut answers to it. All told from the point of view of Leo and his very personal quest to find his dad and his brother.
So, esteemed audience who's probably mostly listening, although even though you're listening, esteemed audience, you can still go to YouTube and hit subscribe. Why not? They can't see that you've got your Star Wars t-shirt on. And you had shown me your super sweet Lego Millennium Falcon a moment ago, which is awesome, and I'm deeply jealous of it. Was Star Wars a big influence, or were there some other science fiction? Where did you draw your science fiction influences from?
Sure. I mean, I think I drew them from lots of different places. Star Wars was huge. I don't know that Star Wars was necessarily huge in terms of, plot and character so much as world building, right? I mean, I learned so much growing up from watching those movies about how just one scene invokes a history that the rest of the movie doesn't even get into. I mean, this was the cool thing about the cantina scene in episode 4, right? Is that you walk into that cantina and you see all these people basically for half a second. And at some point you realize each of them has their own backstory, right? Each of them has their own investment in what's going on with the Empire and the rebels and all this stuff. Each of them has their own wants and needs, maybe their own starship, maybe they got a bounty on their head. And the idea of that sort of rich galaxy has always stuck with me. And so that's one of the things that I wanted to do with this book. But at the same time, like, that's a galaxy far, far away. This is actually set in our galaxy right here, right? Good old Milky Way. And so I drew on a lot of other things, like Star Trek and Stargate and all kinds of things where sort of humanity's stake, as we know it, becomes important, especially with the fragile planet that we're sitting on. And so that was a concern. And then, I have pirates, Guardians of the Galaxy. They're pretty cool. And I think as viewers and readers have grown up, we have an appreciation for a little smart aleckness, right, in our characters. And so I wanted this to be a band of misfits, right? The Goonies, I guess, of the interstellar scene. So, I mean, just so many influences. And those are just the movies, in terms of books. I grew up on Bradbury and Arthur C. Clarke and Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. There's definitely some of that humor in there. I can't pull it off. I can't pull Douglas Adams off. I wouldn't even try. But there's some irreverence, right? And some parody and some satire and some good stuff like that. So yeah, there's a lot. And that's one of the cool things about working in a genre, is being able to tap into all of the things that you grew up with and that you loved, and say, all right, how do I put my own little twist on this? Like, how do I cobble together these bits and pieces, these sort of character archetypes that I love, and these sort of ancient mythological stories, which really go back to the Iliad and the Odyssey, like we were talking about earlier, but set in outer space. And how do I tell my own version of that story and then make it relevant for our 21st century position that we're in? And science fiction is so cool about that because it always uses the future, either near or far, to reflect on the present and even the past. And that sort of metaphorical relationship was one that I really enjoyed exploring.
I'm sure there's a special on the History Channel about how the Iliad was actually written by ancient aliens. So you mentioned the Grateful Dead T-shirt that the pirate's wearing. I assume that means you have listened to at least some Grateful Dead while you're doing the writing. Are you pro Grateful Dead, and so you empathize with the pirate clinging to the past, or are you anti Grateful Dead, and that's why the pirate's wearing it, and that makes you hate him more?
No. I'm definitely I'm definitely pro hang on to the past, if the past is useful to us, right? Especially when it comes to the artistic past. And he's got Pearl Jam T-shirts. I mean, he's got all kinds of stuff. He sort of runs the gamut. I don't know if there's any boy bands that he appreciates, but I know they talk about them at one point. And like his prized possession is David Bowie's Space Odyssey on vinyl, which turns out to be a key to getting some other people to help them. And so for me, I think nostalgia it's useful as a panacea, as a way to sort of look back on the past and say we didn't screw everything up, right? We at least did this. That was good, wasn't it? Even though sometimes we look back on it, we thought it was good, but it turns out it's really not. But I think for this character, Baz is his name, Bastian Black. I think it's a way to not lose sight of his humanity in the great big old universe that he's in. There's this scene from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I don't remember which of the 4 books in the trilogy, or 5 books in the trilogy it is, but it's where Zaphod Beeblebrox goes into this like machine, and it's going to show him just how important he is in the universe, right? And he steps inside this machine, and it shows this like this most minuscule little dot, right? In terms of the like great big huge void of the universe. And basically the point is you are nothing, right? You are a dust mite, if that. And of course, he steps out of it, and he's like, oh, I didn't know I was that important, right? So it's all mindset, right? And so I think for him, for Baz, it's like, I'm going to hold on to the things that make us as a species really cool. And for him, that's Twinkies and old rock bands and really cool, Jordan shoes and whatever.
I do find that for middle grade, and maybe I'm deluding myself, but I'll ask you, and if you agree, then I'll assume that it's all good. But for the second Rediker, there is a technique to build suspense that I've borrowed, repurposed from the second season of Breaking Bad. And obviously, it's redone in completely different terms. It's just I understand the principle of how that I understand that storytelling technique. It could also work here. But as I was doing it, it occurred to me, what the kids that are the ideal target audience for this probably haven't seen Breaking Bad. So even if an adult identified it, which they certainly will now that I'm on a podcast talking about it, I think I'd still be okay. Is that a valid viewpoint, you think, that you can repurpose some things from the past that younger readers won't be as familiar with? And so I think John David Anderson, he's brilliant. This is the first time I'm ever encountering this when maybe it's a trope thing.
I think so. I mean, for me, as trying to remember myself as a young reader, and I don't know if you were the same way, but I was invested in the story. Right, I was invested in character. I didn't really think so much about craft. I wasn't astute enough. And this is going to make my reader sound bad, but it's just about where your sort of focus lies, right? To step outside and ask myself, how is the author manipulating my emotions in this way, right? Or how did he make that cool narrative move there that allows me to all of a sudden become invested in this when before I wasn't? I didn't get to that point until I was probably in high school, like late high school. And that's when I started getting interested in those little moves that narratives make and the storytellers make. Up to that point, like, I just wanted to go to that world in my head. And I just wanted to be that character. And sometimes when we sort of fall back on a trope or an archetype or something like that, I think that makes it easier for readers to identify, right? Because they can say, I've kind of seen this guy somewhere before, right? He's kind of Han Solo. He's kind of my dad. And he's kind of also my sarcastic uncle that we only invite over to the house once a year, right? Because we know he's going to say something wildly inappropriate. And if I merge all those three together and, give him these other three interests, like, yeah, that's him. Like, I know him. And so then you come with your own opinions and investment in that character. And then if that character does something then that goes against all of the tropes and the archetypes that you're used to, then that can also be kind of a revelation or a breath of fresh air, right? Because then you are surprised. You're like, oh, that's really cool. So I like to use them. I like to manipulate them. That's actually how I got my start as a writer. My first book that actually sold anything was Sidekicked, which was me sitting down in my chair saying, why can we name 500 superheroes, but we can only name 2 or 3 superhero sidekicks? Like, we have all these tropes and conventions of the superhero genre, and one of them is the sidekick. But at the same time, like, that's sort of amorphous. Like, unless you're talking about Robin, you don't really know what the conventions of a sidekick are. And so it's at the one time freeing, right? Because it's a space that can be explored. But at the other time, it's not so intimidating, because you have all these other rules that you can choose to play by if you want to, or you can choose to flip on their head to get that reaction out of your reader. So, for example, in that book, I took the main character, Drew. We know he's a superhero. He's a superhero sidekick, but I gave him an incredibly lame power, right? He has extraordinary senses. He can hear, smell, and see things coming from a mile away. But when they get to him, he's completely powerless to stop them, right? It's lights out.
Daredevil's main thing?
Well, yeah, except for Daredevil kind of kicks butt.
Okay,
like, he's learned to overcompensate or to compensate for his blindness, right? With extraordinary hearing. And, if you were to stick Drew and Daredevil next to each other, and then Drew maybe was like, hey, this guy's coming. And Daredevil was like, I saw him coming. He's like, are you going to do anything about it? Because it's got to be you. Because you know what Drew's going to do? He's going to play dead, pretty much. And then Daredevil's going to whip out those little sticky things I don't know what they're called, and beat up the guy or whatnot.
Daredevil, I'm so glad you were here. This is perfect.
We make a good team.
I think that would be my role in a superhero universe. I could identify the danger. Oh, this looks like trouble over here. I'm going to go get dinner. When I come back, I expect you to take care of it.
You're just a very astute, innocent bystander, right? Not me. I'm the guy who gets crushed by the falling car. Hopefully saved by Spider-Man's web at the last second. But if not, it was a good life.
Well, maybe at least motivate him to be really angry and punch extra hard.
There you go. Everybody has a purpose.
Life well lived, a sacrifice that's worthy.
The unsung heroes of the superhero.
Peter Parker's eyes after I died. Well, you'd say it was all worth it. So a duology. I'm curious because did you plan this originally as 2 books, or did you plan a second book? How far out do you plot and plan when you do a story?
So I actually planned it as a trilogy. And when I say planned, I mean for 5 minutes loosely imagined that it could be such a thing. There was no outline. There was nothing like that. There was just, wow, I've spent a lot of time creating this world and these characters, and I love them. And there's a lot at stake here. Galaxy-wide, Earth-wide, family-wide, right? Personal evolution-wide. And so I did not see myself being able to wrap that all up in one book, but I also didn't know how many books it would take. And so when I presented it to my publisher and my editor, it was agreed. Yeah, there's no way that this can be one book now for the middle grade sphere, right? Unless it's going to be 700 pages. And I don't have the kind of clout to pull that off. So then the question is,
who could pull that off, you think?
I mean, there are a couple people who have written books that long for middle graders and gotten away with it. But they have their own theme parks now. Anyways, the point being, like, I knew it was going to be more than one. And so I sort of needed my editor to just give me a number and say, this is what we think it should be. Can you work with that? And so, you get those sort of parameters and you work within those parameters. Could it have been a trilogy? Maybe. Could it have been, 10 books? No, because there's no way that I could have done that without going crazy. But this is actually my very first ever sequel that I've written. And I have to say that the experience has been, so far, and I'm still in the middle of it, it's been very challenging and it's been rewarding artistically. And I don't know that I'll ever do it again because I'm learning about myself as a writer that I very much am invested in getting a character to a certain place and being content with them being there. And that doesn't mean that they don't have a rich future beyond that place that I took them to. It just means that it's not my job at that point to imagine that future for them. And the reader can do it. Go write some fan fiction, whatever it is. And I've always gotten to that place with the book until I got to Stowaway, and it was immensely unsatisfying. And then it created tons of pressure for me to make it satisfying in the sequel, right? So that I get that same feeling that I do, that sort of Christmas present feeling when you're like, yes, that's where it's supposed to end up. And we'll see if it gets there. I want it to get there, obviously. But the fact that it takes 2 books to get that emotional rush for me as an author over the span of 3 or 4 years, as opposed to 1 book over the span of a year and a half, I'll probably go back to the immediate gratification of being content and happy with my stories and wrapping them all up. I say that to you, of course, you have a series. So you probably feel very differently about this.
No, it gets harder every time, and I hate myself a little more for having set it up as a series as opposed to just finishing it and being able to move on. I
Yeah.
mean, here we are. Well, I would think when you're doing contracts, if they'll say, "Hey, we want 10 books," you be like, and you'll pay 10 contract rates. Well, I guess I'm coming up with 10 stories. Here we go.
Right.
But when you're coming back, and then enough time has passed. I mean, you're post-pandemic after this. You're a different person. I mean, everybody's a different person a couple of years later, but after the last year and a half, the harrowing experiences we've all had, I think all of us are a little bit more of a different person than we might be during that same time frame otherwise. Are you finding it difficult to go back and pick up where you left off and understand what you laid down? Are you hating past you and like, hey, if you'd set something else up in the first book, that sure would have helped me out here.
That last part, definitely. In the retrospect and hindsight being, 2020, there are probably things that I could have incorporated. I mean, I think we could probably both go on and on for another 2 hours about how the pandemic has shifted not only our approach to art, but just our understanding of its place in the world and its value to young readers, and even what our young readers look like at this point. I experienced quite a bit of tragedy over the last 2 years, lost both of my parents, 1 year, one right after another. And so for me, it has been a constant pinballing between wanting to escape, which I think a lot of readers probably appreciate, and wanting to just grab that thing, all that angst and all that anger and all that grief and all that remorse by the ears and just throttle it. And to do that through my writing. And so I do feel like a lot of the past couple of years, artistically for me, has been a coping mechanism, as I'm sure it has for you and lots of other people dealing with all the stuff that we've been dealing with. And it's been, very personal at times. And I don't think of Stowaway and its sequel as that kind of book, right? It is definitely more a product of my brain and my imagination than of my heart. Whereas the book that comes out this winter, called Riley's Ghost, is a lot more, I think, akin to the emotions, or in touch with the emotions that I was experiencing over the past 2 years. And again, it's just like, work on this a little bit, get away, go to the galaxy, out there, and then come right back home and face the demons head on. So.
Well, let me ask you this. This might be another one we'll cut out. Maybe we'll cut the whole interview. Who knows what'll happen?
Is it really that bad? Am I doing that bad? God.
No, you're doing fantastic. I'm just asking questions that are slightly more personal. Listen to me. Like, if your release date changes, does that bother you? Should we include your editor and your publicist and your agent? Should they all hear this? Make sure we let them know. Wonderful questions like that. But here's another one a little bit. If Stowaway comes out, is a huge success, the publisher comes back and says, we should have done the 10-book contract the first time, let's do it now. And then Riley's Ghost comes out and some readers absolutely love it, but it's not quite as successful. Would you be happy going toward the more successful story that maybe has your intellect and it has your creativity, but not necessarily your heart? Would that be satisfying for you, knowing that you're going to reach maybe potentially more readers? Or would you continue to want to write at least one emotional story that's, even if you never publish it, just a story for your heart every year?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I should tell you, Rob, that I am really fortunate to have the publisher and the editor I do, with Walden Pond Press, which is a smaller publisher within HarperCollins, and Jordan Brown is my editor. And they kind of give me free reign, for the most part, to follow my head or my heart, whichever one I want to do. I'm always going to write what I feel like writing, whether I think it's going to get published or not. I actually write 2 novels a year. That's a bare minimum. Sometimes it's 3. Only one of them ever gets published. I know that going in. It doesn't bother me. It's not, for me, I publish hopefully enough that I can put food on the table, that I can keep doing it, that I can call it a career. But I write enough that I can feel artistically satisfied, that I can feel like I'm improving at my craft, that I can feel like I'm at least staying on this positive side of grief and, all the terrible things. And so, yeah, I mean, if it comes down to write this because it would make us more money or write this because it's what you want to write, I'm hopefully always going to choose what I want to write. Now, it kind of depends on how much money we're talking about, right?
If I got $5 million,
like the movie deal is in the works.
For Miss Pixie's First Day, the prequel.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
How soon am I getting a copy of that on my desk?
I know. Spielberg's on the phone, right? We've already sold the movie rights to this as yet unimagined novel. Then yeah, maybe I'll consider it. But thankfully, I'm not in that position where anything I've written, I say thankfully, that sounds so terrible. Where anything I've written has taken off so much that it's sort of dominated the course that my writing career has to take. I do say that my realistic fiction sells better than my speculative fiction, and so there's always sort of that underlying pressure to keep it mixed up. Like, I don't think I could ever pick one genre and go down it because of that, because I think my reader kind of expect maybe now not to expect anything, if that makes any sense. They're at the point now where they're like, John, we don't know what's coming next, and we like it. And I'm like, I like it too. I love not knowing what's going to come next. I love being able to explore and try new things and go to dark corners and dust them out and see what's hidden there. So we'll see. But, you're a writer, I'm a writer. That means we both know one thing for sure, and that is we're going to do it no matter what. We'll do it if we're poor. We'll do it if we're rich. We'll probably do it till the day we die or lose our minds. I'm guessing the second one's going to come first before the first one.
Probably happened sometime early on, which is why we're still doing it. Crazy people don't know they're crazy. They're walking around thinking about they're the only one that's sane. Yeah, I always make the joke that's not a joke, that if I was going to quit, there have been so many better opportunities along the way to have quit at this point and didn't take any of them. There was a moment during this past this pandemic where I thought, well, we're talking, we won't spend 2 hours on it, but I am sorry to hear about your parents. And I'm sure there's all other grief and pain and suffering that's going to last us forever. I will never again not have at least one giant thing and a half a giant thing of toilet paper in my home, probably as long as I live. That's just that I won't feel safe. I won't be able to sleep without it. Where was I going with all that? Talking just about the experience of the pandemic. I'm curious to know, were you able to write through that? Did that throw you off your game for a while? Did it? There was a moment where I thought, how important is this in the grand scheme of things? This me sitting down and like, hey, honey, I realize you want to continue talking about your pain, but I have it in my word count today. So let's put that on hold. Let me make sure I check in on these fictional characters, which was important. It kept me sane. Were you able to proceed, not quite business as usual, but to write pretty much more or less, or did you have a period of nothing's coming out and I'm just reading the news all day? Or
I think for me it was definitely a therapeutic act, and so while there might have been definitely times where I questioned the value of what I was producing in terms of the outside world. Like, do people really want another John David Anderson book? Like, is it going to do them any good? Or do they have, 50 other things that are definitely more important for them to do than sit down and read a middle grade novel? Especially the young readers that I'm writing to who are going through, their version of heck right now. But again, for me, as you say it was for you, check on these fictional characters, it was necessary. And I don't think my writing production went down at all, although it shifted. Like I started writing poetry as, a way to not only get my brain still processing language and thinking about craft and how words can go together, and but also just as a way to condense feelings and emotions into something that I can look at just on one single page, right? And 4 stanzas and then I'm done, I'm out. And so there was a lot of that. I think the quality of my writing went down a little bit as a result of the pandemic, but I think that's more just a matter of focus and constant distraction than anything else. I had more trouble getting in the zone, and there are times pre-pandemic where I could sit at my desk and literally write for 10 hours straight, like wouldn't even get up to eat, but it was just sort of this hyper-focused artistic explosion. And I don't know I've had that one single time in the last 3 years. But I don't know what to attribute that to or blame that on. News cycle or just weight of the world or whatnot. But I think most of the artists, most of the writers that I've talked to over the past 2 years have said that it's been definitely more of a struggle. But at the same time, I feel like most of them have said it's also renewed their sense of purpose, because with increased environmental concerns and social unrest and political shenanigans, not to mention the need for humanity to actually come together to deal with some stuff, right? That's sitting on their plate, has really prompted a deeper understanding of the value that literature and any artistic enterprise can fill, right? Especially for our young people who are looking to engage in the world and are very critical thinkers, and are becoming more active and politically minded, and really have this world in their hands. And so when I stop and take the long view of it, and I'm not thinking about my own personal life and what I've got to do today and whatnot, I feel actually more optimistic and a greater sense that what we do, especially writing books for young readers, has immense value to open up their eyes, to keep them curious, to make them question things, but also to give them that escape that they need sometimes. To get away from the pressing weight of the world that is slowly descending upon their shoulders.
Fair. You had said something. You know a writer that I know. Was thinking of writers and their reactions to the pandemic, and I think most people have been taken back a little bit. I know a couple of good friends who I never thought would quit writing who appear to have just done that. Although I'm always skeptical, because there were plenty of great opportunities for you to quit when it made even more sense, and you never did. So I don't necessarily know that you'll be back. But Maurice Broaddus, of course. Mm-hmm. And that guy, man, don't be friends with that guy during a pandemic if you want to feel good about your writing, because he was like the Terminator, just relentless. Just every day he's on his porch, just typing away, writing novellas, short stories, you name it. That guy's producing a lifetime's worth of work during the pandemic, which I think is probably, in retrospect, the better way to have reacted. And I wish I had whatever switches in Maurice's brain and in my mind, because that was one thing that when not to dwell on this forever, but when the insurrection happened, but didn't necessarily mark the end, probably. Although we'll see. I think it's a little bit early to count that as completely resolved yet, but. Red Dawn from Within didn't quite happen that we know of. So all right, Well, I worried a whole lot right up to that moment, and then at the last moment, the most improbable thing possible happened, and that was the Eugene Goodman pushing the first insurrectionist and getting like a gang of Looney Tune characters to follow me this away, and you see that, and it's so improbable and so crazy. Like if that was in a book, you'd never buy that as the ending. That's nuts. And I see that like, this was an episode of Quantum Leap. That's who Dr. Sam Beckett was this week. Get out of here. That doesn't happen in real life, but it did happen. And you see that, and like, okay, well, I worried nonstop, and then this happened, and it was fine. Okay, well, all of my worrying did not add value to my life. And in the end, I don't think there's anything I could take away from that. I wish I had been more Maurice Broaddus during that time. As let's be frank, we all wish all the time. But I wish I had kept my head down and just kept writing a little bit more. And next pandemic, next violent uprising, I'm going to keep that in mind and maybe keep my nose to the grindstone a little bit.
I mean, we all process it differently. Right. And I think the assumption that we make is that as writers, maybe we have an outlet that other people don't have, because we do have these magnificent worlds that we can escape to. But I mean, I guess the question would be, all those pages and novellas and short stories that Maurice was producing, right? Like, it's impossible for us, for you or me or anybody else, to really truly gauge the value that had for him, right? And so, if you only produce one short story in a year, but that short story helped you make sense of something terrible that happened in your life or in the world around you, then that was a valuable piece of art, right? That was not a waste of time. And maybe there was a lot of worry that was a waste of time, but the worry that helped produce that one piece of art, that was great, right? And I'm being reductive here, but I really think it's impossible to separate, the thing that we do for a living, the process that we engage in, from all the other stuff that's happening around us. So that even if you're not writing about insurrectionists, right, or you're not writing about institutional racism, I think that stuff finds its way into your books, regardless, one way or another, or at least your angst and your fears and your desires and your hopes for humanity and all those things find their way into the book, get channeled somehow, metaphorically in all these other ways. I always, there's a quote, and I'm trying to remember who said it. I think it was Willa Cather, who said, everything a writer needs, they know by the age of 15. And I go to schools and I talk to kids about writing, and I tell them that, and I ask them what they think that means, and we get a lot of different answers. But what I think it means is that by the age of 15, you know what fear is, you know what love is, you know what loss is. You may not have experienced these things directly, intensely, but you're aware of them. And it's those sort of emotional valences that seep into our work, or anyone's work. And so I think one of the things that's going to happen, and we'll see if I'm right, is that over the next few years, there's going to be some seriously charged stuff, right, that artists have been producing, because they've been channeling all of those emotions that they've experienced for the past 2 years. And maybe they weren't able to write about them at the time, but they're in there, right? They get stored in the psyche, and then the psyche does its magic and works it into narrative and tries to make sense of it with story. And then, those of us who have the pen or the paper or the ink or the brush or the, you name it, the Lego, we find a way to put those pieces together and present it to the world. And so, I mean, that's, Maurice was able to do that at the time. Pretty remarkable. That just means the rest of us are playing catch up. And, we'll be doing it too. And authors that, may have quit publishing, I don't know that they will have quit imagining. I don't know that they will have quit using narrative to make meaning of their world. I really doubt that they will have quit telling stories. If it's to their family or their kids or their friends or in their head, you'll never stop using that tool, right? The tool of storytelling to give value to the experiences that you're going through and to help you make sense of them. And I think as writers, not only do we do that for ourselves, but especially we teach the next generation how to do that as well. Like, what are the narratives that you're writing in your own life that are helping you to make sense of the universe?
I don't know. You feel this way. I feel this. I find myself a little bit terrified when I'm writing. Sometimes I'll go back and I'll read what I've written, and I'll say, "Oh, that thing that was in my life that I thought I was leaving completely separate from this story has wormed its way in, and now my vulnerability is there on the page, and that was not intended. That's not cool." But I realize that's part of the process. It just bugs me personally. Okay. I don't know. Does that bug you, or does that gratify you that that's been preserved?
Yeah, I kind of feel differently than you do about that. Whenever that happens, if I'm at least astute enough to recognize it, which I'm probably not, but on the rare occasions where I'm like, oh yeah, that's definitely where that's coming from, then I think it enriches the experience somehow, because at least I know I can speak with some degree of emotional authenticity to this, and in some ways, in a lot of ways, I've had an incredibly blessed life. And so when it comes down to creating drama and creating conflict, a lot of that is manufactured, right? A lot of that is conflict and drama that I read about and I saw on TV and whatnot. It's not something that I've personally experienced. I've never been stowed away aboard a spacefaring vessel that has just been attacked by aliens, right? It just hasn't happened yet, right? It could. There's still time. But I do know what it's like to be suddenly separated from family. And so when I see my sort of heart spilling out onto the page in that way, and my insecurities and my vulnerabilities coming through, my hope is that just allows me to connect to the reader even more strongly. And it doesn't bother me. As long as I don't use real people's names, right? Then I'm okay. Isn't that the rule?
I mean, if you're slick about it, which you haven't been caught thus far, so I guess you must.
Nobody knows. Nobody knows.
When I read about Ralph the Obnoxious Podcaster, I'll try not to take it personally. I say, oh, well, fair enough. Here's a problem that I had that's maybe a little bit imaginary that I think I wanted to ask you regarding Stowaway, because that's the story hinging a little bit on First Contact. And I think the big story from 2020 is not going to be the political stuff. It's not going to be COVID. It's going to be that the Pentagon confirms flying saucers. That's a real deal. In the grand scheme of humanity, plagues come and go. What's this now about alien life being real? Go back a little bit. we need to explore that a little more. Does that concern you now, writing your sequel, that we're going to have something very real to compare all this sci-fi to potentially here in the near future?
You say potentially. I'm still not convinced what it is and what it's not. There's so much junk floating out there that we've created that I guess I have more respect for advanced intelligent alien life, that if they were going to come to us, I don't know, I feel like they wouldn't be so coy about it. I feel like they'd just be like in our face, like, here's the deal, take it or leave it. Do we want to blow up your planet or not? Give us one good reason why we shouldn't. And I think we would struggle, right, to come up with a good one that we could all agree on. Anyways, like that could be humanity's greatest challenge. It's funny that you asked this, because it wasn't something that I actually gave it a whole lot of thought until I started writing that novel, and doing just a little bit of research, because it's takes place in the galaxy, and so I had to get a sense of the great span of things, and read a lot about this, the Big Bang and whatnot, and realized that I don't know enough about physics to explain anything, in any kind of depth. So aliens, right? Alien magic, whatever it is. But one of the things it did for me is it made me realize I am 99.99% sure that there is life out there besides us, right? That is completely intelligent. That has access to vast technologies, right, that we probably can't even imagine yet. And I am also 99.99% sure that they have little to no interest in us, right? Maybe a passing scientific curiosity, right? But the odds of us finding them or them finding us and us creating, a new perfect universal order, or somehow obliterating each other out of existence, I just don't see it happening, at least not in my lifetime or my kid's lifetime. But if that 0.001, I'm maybe getting my numbers mixed up, percent chance that does happen, and somebody finds somebody, then I think we better come up with that one reason real quick.
Think of what it might be.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go ahead and Batman. Batman, maybe Batman? Like the aliens came down, like, I don't know about all this war you guys got going on. Yeah, but sit down. Batman. Watch this Batman movie. It's the Keaton Batman, none of this newfangled now. The pure mainstream. Let me give you some Burton. Then maybe we'll do the Dark Knight. And ooh, we like humanity. It's cool.
Okay. Well, maybe if you combine that with mine, which was deep dish pizza, then that could convince them. But art is universal. Pizza, I don't know that it is. Aliens could have dietary restrictions that we're not aware of. So.
I think that it's entirely probable that what's being discovered is not aliens flying around, but just whatever the alien equivalent of a drone is. Just so that they're not that interested in us, that they've just got a bunch of drones going out all over the universe and like, look at that, there's some primitive life down there. Oh, they've got nukes. So let's see how this plays out. This will be the subject of a term paper for at least one alien grad student. The rest of the aliens are more concerned about the rest of the universe.
I could totally see them like going to a conference and like putting up their PowerPoint presentation, like humans, right? What you need to know, bullet point, like 6 things, and then he's out, just done. Yeah, I mean, I like the idea that they are watching us, waiting to see how it plays out, right? Because I think we're kind of doing the same thing, and I think that maybe one of our downfalls is that we're really good at just sitting back and saying, let's see how this plays out, and by the time they actually decide that there's something on this planet worth having or exploring or taking an interest in, we may have completely trashed it beyond all recognition. It's really hard to tell, and they may know that. But at the same token, maybe they'll come save us from ourselves. That would be nice.
That would be wonderful.
We don't see it
unsatisfying as storytellers for a direct.
We don't see that story very often.
But since it's us, I think we can allow it. It's fine. It doesn't have to be satisfying. Just don't let us all die.
please, sir, save my planet.
Well, Steve, audience knows I have to ask this since I ask everybody. I'm assuming that you have not ever seen a flying saucer. Have you ever seen a ghost?
I have not seen either, to the best of my knowledge. My parents sort of believed a little bit in the supernatural, and so they would tell me stories of Ouija boards going crazy, as teenagers, and bumps in the night and those kinds of things. But I think as a writer, especially as somebody who was reading Stephen King at the age of 11, stealing my father's books out of the bathroom, right, and taking them back to my bedroom and reading them at midnight under the covers with a flashlight. I am not going to say no to anything, right? I think the possibilities are out there. And while there are things that we don't necessarily see with our eyes, there are things that we feel in our heart. And I don't know if we're talking about ghosts or specters or souls or whatever it is, but there are moments when I feel like there are people I love that are no longer with us, that are still nearby somehow, right? That even if they're not watching over us, there's a fragment or a remnant. There's something supernatural that's been left behind. Whether that guides us or provides us solace, or just reminds us of the love that we felt for them. I'm not sure what its function is, but I sometimes get that feeling. And those are the kinds of ghosts that I like.
So trying to think what question to follow that up with that won't seem trite. But now that I've said that, it's fair game. I've already said the trite thing. We're good. Yeah. I did have some quotes from you that I wanted to make sure I asked you about. And actually, I had some questions. I had some questions for you about Miss Bixby's last day. Because I had the pleasure of enjoying that here on audiobook in preparation. And were you teaching when that book came out?
I was not.
Okay.
My wife was teaching, and my mother was teaching, and half of our friends were teachers. So it's not as if I wasn't part of the crowd, right? At least by association.
Question, because you start off with the classifications of the teachers are zombies, dungeon masters, Spielbergs, noobs, good ones. And I'm remembering my own experience as teachers plus my time in schools since having seen that. Yes, that's absolutely who's doing the classes. But should you say that out loud before you go to school visits? All of those teachers, has that created awkward situations, or have teachers come up to you and said, "Yes, man, you nailed it. You said everything you needed to be said"?
Yeah, no, it's definitely the second one. I think teachers actually really appreciate that passage, and I always sort of make it the point to say that we're dabbling in caricature here, and that you only have one of these probably through your entire career. As a student, you're only going to have one true-fledged dungeon master, but you're going to remember that guy, right? Or girl, or you'll only have one necessarily complete calf addict, right? Everybody will come in with their Starbucks, but there's going to be one who's really just going to be jumping and jittery the whole day long. And my hope is, of course, that you get more than one Miss Bixby, right? One of the good ones. But sometimes you only get one of those too, and everyone else maybe doesn't fall as neatly into like prescribed 7 categories. I know as a teacher at the University of Illinois, I definitely had my Spielberg days, right? Where I'd be like, we're just going to do this today because it doesn't require any effort from me. And all the effort is you. And I know that you're paying, an ungodly amount of money for your tuition, but, just give me this one afternoon, please. So yeah, no, they love it. And I've gotten, a great response from educators from that book. Because I think one of the things that book does do well is it just shows how far-reaching the impact of our teachers have on us, right? That it extends so far beyond the classroom. And I know we always say that, but it's hard to appreciate. And especially if you think about everything that teachers have had to go through for the last 2 years to reach beyond the classroom that, they couldn't actually be in, to connect with students and try to get them motivated to learn. And to love their subject matter, right? And to stay engaged and socially active and make them aware. Like, that's amazing. It's an amazing job, and I have the utmost respect for them. And so that's one of the things that I set out with that particular book. I mean, I set out to do a lot of things with that book, but one thing is to say, the experience that a good teacher can have, like the impact a good teacher can have on your life, you are not going to recognize that in its full intensity until 5, 10, maybe 20 years down the road. And then you're going to look back and you're like, wow, right? That was amazing.
Well, in all fairness, any teacher that is reading middle grade books, wants to have an author come and talk to their students, is definitely in the Miss Bixby category already. They are the good ones. And if somebody's reading it that's a dungeon master, they think they're the Miss Bixby. They don't know.
I wasn't going to say it.
They're laughing at all those other poor teachers. I also wondered, I was going to ask about the cootie opening in like of the pandemic. It opens up and you know they've got the full protective gear on to prevent from cooties. And I'm reading, oh man, that's a different read now, I'm sure, than when it was written and what it was intended.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you've experienced that same thing, but especially over the first year, 2020, I actually had to ask my editor. I'm like, what do we do at this point? We have novels that are slated to come out that don't address this at all, like set modern day, realistic fiction. But we wrote them 2 years ago, right? And we've been in the process of editing them, so nobody's wearing a mask, right? Everybody's still in school. And then what do we do 2 years from now when we go back to reflect on this time? Like, do we imagine an alternative reality where COVID-19 didn't exist? And then to get at what you're getting at, and then how does this change the stuff that we've already written? Yeah, looking back on that first chapter, it's incredibly startling, and I wouldn't have written it that way. But 5 years from now, is it going to carry the same valence? Like 10 years from now, if it's even still in print, right? Will it matter?
It was enjoyable. It didn't stop that. It was just a momentary of, oh. But it's not much different than if you see, like, people just open mouth kissing on a TV show from back in the, oh, you shouldn't do that until you see their vaccination card and you've shown them theirs.
Right.
There are there's a steps to take before you get to that. So that's all.
And I mean, and that also speaks to one of the things that, as an artist, I'm sure you think about too, which is balancing what we could possibly be considered to be universal appeal or universal truth, right? Something that's going to stand the test of time with addressing like a very current need. And, I have a book called Posted, which is all about the power of language, and it's about friendships falling apart, and it's about social angst and social strata and bullying and all that stuff. And I feel like when I wrote that book at the time, and probably still a little bit now, it reads well, right? It carries weight, and I think readers react to it the way that I wanted them to. 10 years down the road, though, I don't know. Like, I don't know if it's going to carry that same weight or have that same meaningful impact because I feel like it was a product of its time. I was revising that book when the presidential primaries were underway for the 2016 election. And so I'm sitting there watching debates, and the people who are vying for the position of what some consider to be the most powerful person in the world were calling each other names, right? And I was thinking to myself, these are our role models, right? These are the people our kids are going to look up to. For how they should use language and how they should use words. And that's why this novel is important, right? And I don't always set out with a novel to be like, all right, this novel is going to have a message. This novel is going to teach you something, gosh darn it. But with that book, I did, right? And I do wonder sometimes if the messages that we choose to include in our books are context specific, or if somehow they will manage to morph and have value for generations of readers to come. But then I look at the books that I loved as a kid, and I would say 70, 80% of them I go back to, and they're just as meaningful to me now, if not more, than they were when I was a kid. Some things probably lose their luster, right? But the power of fiction, the power of storytelling, is that we can tell stories that everybody can connect to on some level, I hope. At least that's the goal.
I mean, Tales from a Fourth Grade Nothing is going to continue to outsell both of us forever, in perpetuity. it will never not be.
I'm not jealous.
Yeah, no. This actually, this last year and a half had finally convinced me to quit with the messages. Like, people don't listen. let's tell the story. Let's have fun. If you present people with scientific data that you will die, you will kill your loved ones, wear a mask, socially distance, they go, no. But, all right, man. What is the middle grade ninja gonna say in the face of that? You've made your choice. I can't help you. Let's tell a fun story, and hopefully I'll reach a few people here and there, and that's about all I'm gonna aspire to.
Yeah. But don't you feel like when you picture that 10-year-old reader or that 12-year-old reader, don't you just picture this? I do. This like huge spongy brain, right? With all this potential and capability, just like, I don't know, with tendrils, right? Curiosity and creativity just shooting out, grasping onto whatever they can. And you think to yourself, there is still time, right? You can be brought back to the light side. I know the Emperor hasn't driven it from you fully, right? And so I think that's one of the advantages of writing for middle grade and for younger audiences, is that I don't get disillusioned with that aspect of it. I always feel like there's an openness and a readiness in my readers to at least go on the journey. Now, when they get to the end of the journey, if I leave them a little kernel of wisdom, right, if there's a little something tucked inside the fortune cookie and they read it and they're like, no, not buying it, that's fine. That's cool. They have their reasons. As long as they have reasons. As long as they went on the journey. As long as they actually gave me, the time and, the mental energy to think about it at least. Then that was the start of a conversation, right, between us. Now, if I had to write for adults, which I know you also do, then I think I would probably have a very different viewpoint on it.
Well, those, I mean, not all adults are lost causes. Some people do see the light. But I remember, who I was, 5th, 6th grade, when I would have been the ideal audience for some of these books versus who I became versus who I grew up to be. Very different. And there were some ideas that flew in the face of I was raised very religious, very small town values, very, very much in disagreement with adult Rob, but same guy, kind of, sort of. And those little seeds that get planted, they add up eventually. It takes time. It won't happen like immediately. But you come back and you bump into somebody after they're in college and they got away from the town that they're in and some of the no good friends that they had, because that's who was in proximity to them at the time. And you did the best of what's around with the friends that you had. But now you've gone out into the world, you've been able to pick some people with broader perspectives. My God, you're a new person, and that seed that you picked up in John David Anderson's book was what started it all. It was a slow growth thing.
We can certainly hope, but I also don't want to dismiss what you said, because I don't think we need to lose track of the fun either, man. Like, I didn't fall in love with books as a kid because of the social messages that they were delivering to me. Yeah, they're seeds. Certainly they were there. I was vaguely aware of them, but I fell in love with books because they made me laugh. And they scared me so much that I almost peed my pants. And I fell in love with books because there was the possibility that if I opened my closet door, right, I could walk through and then I'd be in Narnia. And that would be incredibly awesome. And so I think that should be always our first priority, right? Make it fun. Make it adventurous. use our imaginations and our creativity to get them to love to read. And then once they're hooked, we can needle them and poke them and say, think about this, consider this, open your mind, right? And that's great. And I've met, hundreds, thousands of young readers who are infinitely smarter and wiser than I am already. And I attribute that to the fact that, honestly, they read books, right? They got hooked at them at a young age. Somebody read to them in bed, and they've explored all kinds of places that they couldn't get to otherwise, and put themselves in other people's shoes, and it's created empathy in them, and it's created an awareness, and those are things that we actually only get. That's a place we only get to once we've already discovered the joy of reading, right? The pleasures of escaping and investing in characters and getting to that climax and seeing it all come together. So we got to do that first, and then whatever room's left over, maybe try to change the world. I don't know.
That's true. I like it.
One pizza and Batman at a time.
Ambitious. You've only got so much time. Why not? But no, you're right. If you don't get them entertained and get them paying attention, then you're not going to get to the point where the seeds are there that they're paying enough attention. I remember I just liked The Giver as a great science fiction story when I read it, and it wasn't until I grew up that I said, "Oh, wait a minute." It like that joke that you get on the way home, except the way home is 12 years later. Oh, that's what it was.
Exactly. Oh man, I love that book too. And I think about the books that I loved as a kid. I couldn't tell you what the redeeming value, like the underlying social message of Lloyd Alexander is. I just remember devouring those books, though, right? The High King and Terran Wanderer and all those, and the Black Cauldron. And now when I look back on it, the value wasn't in anything that I learned, like I'm sure there's a message there. Be friends with creatures who have crunchies and munchies, right? Dark Lords are bad, whatever. This seems to be a recurring message, right? In middle grade literature. Dark Lords bad, crunchies and munchies good. But I think for me, like the value in that book was just broadening my imagination, right? And that's something else that young people's literature does, is it shows just how vast our creative minds are. And I don't know about you, but a lot of my first things that I ever wrote were just copies of things that I loved. My very first novel was called Loath to Be One with the Universe. I wrote it when I was 17 years old. It was 150 pages long. I wrote it on a Brother word processor typewriter with a 3.5-inch floppy disk drive, right? It had a 3-line LED screen. I finished that puppy, 150 pages. I hit print. It said insert paper. So I did, and it typed it out. One letter after another, and then I had to insert another. It took me 3.5 hours to print my novel, right? Which is kind of ridiculous.
So you're done. Your novel's gone forever.
Right? Exactly. But you know what it was? It was Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy Redux, right? It was just me appropriating Douglas Adams to my own ends, down to his narrative voice. I mean, it was fan fiction without necessarily using the characters' names. But it's because I recognized all the potential in that universe that he had created, and I fell in love with it. And so even if nothing else, if we write books and we create works of art, and that causes the next generation to become more creative and invested in their own imaginations, then they'll write great works and create great works of art. And even if ours don't change the world, guess what? There's mine, right? So I never try to underestimate the influence that one of my books can have on a reader, because I understand the influence that so many books have had on me.
Well, even on the off chance, and we know this isn't the case because you've already had quite a bit of a positive reader reaction to your books. You know readers that have been impacted by your books. But even supposing that weren't the case, that we could guarantee that would never happen, the impact I think that it would have on the writer to have made your own life better, to have written the thing, would still not be inconsiderable.
Yeah. I mean, you balance that against all your other needs, right? And I'd be lying if I said it wouldn't be infinitely harder to be a writer and not have it as my career, right? That being a published writer makes writing that much more guilt-free, as it were. And so that when I want to spend 6 hours in a day, in my own imaginary worlds, I can at least point to the occasional paycheck that it brings in. Be like, it's okay, honey. This will pay off in the long run. I promise. And it does. I mean, obviously, it puts added pressure because then you're not just writing for yourself. You're writing to be published. You're writing because you know that there's readership out there that has their own expectations. But I guess what I'm trying to say is, I think, yeah, incredibly valuable for the writer to have done it. But I'm also incredibly grateful and thankful that I get to do it for a living, and so that there is a space, sort of a dedicated space in my life where I don't feel like I have to sacrifice so much to do it. And I think about all those writers out there who do work other 40-hour jobs or 2 jobs and raise their kids, and it's 11 o'clock at night and they still feel that artistic impulse and they're bone tired and exhausted, but they really have something important to say to the world, and so they stay up until 2 o'clock in the morning getting that on paper. And I'd like to think that I have the chutzpah to do that, and maybe when I was 20 I could have, but now, like, those people, they definitely have my admiration. And I tell them, I'm like, you guys are heroes. Like, anybody who finds the time to write among everything else that's going on, if it's not their career, if it's not their job, like, that is dedication. But, maybe, I mean, that's where I got started too. So hopefully everybody who has something to say hopefully everybody who has something meaningful and important and not harmful to say will find a platform and the capability to say it.
Well, I don't know, and maybe I'm in the minority on this. I always think that let the people with bad things to say go ahead and say those out loud too, and let's hear them out, and then shoot them down and realize, like, if somebody a little bit smoother than Ayn Rand came out with a new Atlas Shrugged and made those arguments just a little bit more convincing than the cartoonish buffoonery that they are now. And look how much trouble that book has caused. Oh, right. My God, with Alan Greenspan being an Ayn Rand devotee, that's one of the reasons we have income inequality. Ayn Rand did it to us. But, if somebody, you can look at her ideas and say, oh, this is just a lonely person who did a lot of methamphetamine toward the end of her life, who the whole book is about, I'm right and you're all wrong, and I'm going to go with John Galt to a secret place, and I'm going to be okay there. And like that, to me, that's transparent. Like, oh, you needed a hug. You didn't need a 1,000-page book. But if somebody just a little bit more clever than that came along and put some spit shine on that, that would be worse. So no, leave Atlas Shrugged right where it is so people can read that, see it for the cartoonish buffoonery it is, shoot it down, and then have that idea rejected. You're inoculated against that silly idea, hopefully going forward.
I guess, I mean, I didn't think about the idea of inoculation, right? Ideology inoculation. There's definitely tremendous value in that. We need more inoculation in this world between you and me, right?
Maybe, I don't know. Maybe it doesn't always work out because there Alan Greenspan, by all accounts, pretty smart guy, still fell for it. So I don't know. I did have a question. Speaking of writers from the past, there was something I caught from. This is a Hoosier question I'm about to ask, just us Hoosiers here.
Okay.
But you've got these wonderful Bixbyisms where Miss Bixby gives these quotes that she doesn't attribute to, and the first Bixbyism in the book is from Mother Night. It's we are what we pretend to be, so we must be careful about what we pretend to be. And then you don't say who that quote's from, and I thought, this is a fella who knows he's going to be promoting this book in Indiana, and if you're promoting something in Indiana, you always say Kurt Vonnegut, world's greatest author, James Dean, world's greatest actor, Jack and Diane, world's best song, John Cougar Mellencamp, bless him, all of our Hoosier artists, we love them, and I was just curious. Why not? I suppose that the people who know, and they're still going to be excited and talk to you about it, and you can still incorporate Vonnegut a little bit in your impression. But if you're marketing books in Indiana, well, why not get on that Vonnegut train early?
Well, I mean, I'm not going to say I'm not on the train. I've got my so it goes hat, right?
Now we're talking.
Yeah, exactly. So, but I think a lot of that just actually has to do with target audience, right, and genre. And Miss Bixby can stand up there and say blah blah said this or blah blah said that, and the kids are going to look at her and be like, okay, yeah, was it Beyonce, right? I don't know, is Beyonce still popular? So it's one of those things where you separate the language, you separate the meaning in the quote from the speaker, and you let the kids just grapple with the words themselves, right? And so to me, at least taking it from the point of view of the three characters that are in the book, it didn't matter who said it. What mattered was Miss Bixby believed it, and therefore it had value, and therefore I should think about it and find a way that I can apply it to my current situation. Now, as an Indiana author, yeah, huge Vonnegut fan, right? Probably at least reference him in every third book or quote him here or there. But I struggle as a middle grade author to want to include too many references to the things that I love and adore, because I'm not sure that all my readers also will love and adore them. With the exception of Star Wars. I just assume everybody's going to love and adore Star Wars, even though I know that's not true. So every novel has a Star Wars reference.
The people that don't appreciate Star Wars aren't the people you're going to reach with your novel. They're unreachable. Well, I'm watching our time, and I know it's flown by. Where did it go? It's probably time to start thinking about landing this thing, but I can't help but think about this idea of you're writing 3 books a year, 2 to 3 per year, and that some of those aren't going to be published. So what becomes of the brokenhearted? What does that bother you? Is there some hope when you put those on a shelf of not to be published that eventually the market's going to change and then I'll whip that thing off the shelf and we'll find a home for it? Or was it, I had my experience, I got what I needed and I'm gratified, so it's okay that this isn't one that's going to find readers?
It's definitely more the latter, and that when I think I said earlier, when I sit down to write a book, maybe I didn't say this, but I always sit down and write a book for one person, right? That's me. I'm trying to satisfy, in many cases, the 12 or 13-year-old reader that I was growing up. And so if I can do that, then it's a worthwhile experience. Also, of course, I think you learn something from everything that you write. The ones that get published, and certainly you learn from the ones that don't get published. And whether or not, I mean, obviously I've got 10, 11, 12 completed novels sitting on the hard drive that I'm the only person who's ever read. And if they ever see the light of day, it'll be because I think I went back to them with fresh eyes and made them better. It just wasn't their time. It wasn't my time to make them the best novel that they could be right now. And yeah, if the market changes and all of a sudden, let's imagine that I've got this superhero novel waiting in the wings, and superheroes should become popular because they're not yet, then oh, I'll just dust that off and throw it out there. I forget which book it was, whether it was Buick 8 or something like that, but it was a Stephen King novel, and I think it was after he retired the second time, or maybe it was after he retired the first time, but he published it, and in his foreword, he's like, this has been sitting around, and I didn't think anybody wanted to read it. But then I'm like, you know what? People will read anything, And he didn't actually say that. But I'm sort of paraphrasing, right? Where he's like, I know it's going to get published, and because I'm Stephen King, I know I'm going to make money off of it. So maybe there's merit in me going back to it and seeing if I can turn it into something that I'm proud of, right? And obviously he did, but at the same time, it's kind of one of those things where, like, you get it. I imagine you do get into a position, if you're incredibly successful, where it doesn't matter if the quality drops off. You're still going to find your audience, and you're still going to sell 1 million copies. The question is, do you have the integrity, right, to produce something that you're still proud of? And I don't think I would want to put anything else out there that I couldn't talk about and say, yeah, this was as good as I could do at the time, right? And I don't know that I have yet. I think I've tried as hard as I can on every book that's gone out there. Are they perfect? No. God, they all have problems. So flawed, right? I'm still learning so much. But I think at the time they were the best books that I could write. And hopefully they'll get better. Maybe they'll get worse. Who knows? I'm not going to stop trying.
It was, I think, Blaze. It was a Richard Bachman novel after Bachman had been proven to be Stephen King, came out, and he had something like that in the foreword where it's like, this is a novel that I wrote forever ago, and I've cleaned it up a little bit. And I'm like, no, you should have left it in the trunk, man. I'm glad you wrote that and you learned the lessons that you needed to know that let you go on to write The Shining and all the other classics. But right. I could have lived my whole life without reading Blaze. Yeah. It would have been fine. And what happens then if upon having lived a long and successful life, extended artificially by at least 100 years, but then after that, your great-grandchildren say, hey, we're the great-grandchildren of the great novelist John David Anderson, and he's got this trunk of novels that he never published, and wouldn't you know it, rent's due, let's get those bad boys out there. That bother you, or you don't care at that point because you're someplace else where this is no longer a concern?
I've actually never considered this question, but I do. Now that you're saying it, my initial impulse is to say, yeah, great grandchildren, go make a mint, right? Go milk as much out of this as you possibly can. But the way you phrase it makes me think that that's not the reaction I should have. That maybe I should, even beyond the grave, be concerned about my own artistic integrity.
Sounds more benevolent if you want your grandkids to live a nice life, I think.
Yeah, it is. It is. And again, it's impossible to know what, future generations will consider to be fantastic works of art or even just good beach reads. But I want to say that if it's good enough, I'll really fight for it, right? And I think you can find a way to get it out there into the world. And maybe I'll look back on some of these things that I've written that I haven't published, and I'll make them good enough. Who knows? But yeah, it's hard for me to think about the idea of lasting legacy. I know that's one of the things that we as authors kind of go into it for, is that sort of elusive pipe dream that, yeah, 3 generations from now, our books will still be on the shelf. But there's so many books on the shelf, Rob. I mean, I walk into a bookstore now and I'm just like, how are all these people publishing novels? Like, where does all this stuff come from? And how does anybody read even 1 gazillionth of the stories that are out there, let alone manage to float to the top and get read by millions and millions of people? And so I've gotten to the point where, like, fleeting success is really what I'm content with. Like I'm gonna keep this train chugging for as long as I can until I run it off the cliff, and then we'll try something else. And if I should get lucky and write something that does stand the test of time, or gets turned into a movie, right? Then that's icing on the cake. But it's not the be all to end all.
I've just given myself that already, because what difference does it make? I just assume that the moment I die, my books will immediately jump in tremendous value. Everyone will read them. They will be taught in every classroom. And if I'm wrong, who cares? Because I frequently think there's two possibilities. Either William Shakespeare has no idea we're reading his stuff. I'm completely unaware. Like I wish I had made more money, or I guess I was really King James the whole time, whatever theory he subscribed to, and then he dies and he has no idea, or he is in some afterlife looking down and like, this is really satisfying, and this afterlife is so uninteresting to me that I'm just focused on those present day humans and making sure that they're writing the best possible term papers. And Kenneth Branagh, you better make a good adaptation of this one, buddy. I imagine that if he is in an afterlife, he's writing new plays. He's not focused on what we're doing with the old stuff.
For sure, yeah. No, I mean, I guess there are probably ways that we could guarantee our longevity and our infamy. Maybe if we do die tragically in some kind of mirror episode that directly translates to something that's happened in our own novels, that would be cool. I don't know that I necessarily want to set that process in motion just yet. I don't know. Fame, like I'm not famous. I don't know if you consider yourself famous. Kids will ask me that at school visits all the time. They're like, wow, are you famous? Did I just meet a famous person? And I just tell them the truth. I'm like, no, nobody knows me. You want to tell the truth? I've had people recognize me on the street once. It was at a librarians conference, and it was right outside of the convention center, right? And so, it's got to be a very specific audience at a very specific place and time, and then maybe 1 in a million chance I'm going to get recognized. So yeah, I think for most writers, it's probably not about fame or living beyond just what they produce at the time. It's about that aching need, right, to tell the story, and then hopefully that connection with that reader that comes after, where some kid just says, "I loved your book. It's the first book I've read all year," right? And you're like, oh, "That's it. Like that's the whole reason I do it, right? Was to get you to sit down."
Those grandchildren are going to look at those 10 novels and they just need a little bit of touching up. Fortunately, we have Granddad's old toothbrush. Let's just clone him and get him to come back and touch these up, so problem solved.
Well, provided the aliens do show up to provide that kind of intense cloning technology, then yes, we can pull that off. Oh man! So who would you bring back?
Oh, if I could bring back anybody, I mean, aside from
let's bring off, obviously.
Again. Once isn't enough. Oh man, that's you have stumped me. I guess maybe Shakespeare, just to solve that mystery and see. That's too much responsibility. I should not be the person to decide what we're going to do with the cloning technology. You pick. Who will we bring back?
I mean, does it have to be an author?
Yeah, it can be Genghis Khan if you really want to spice things up. Whatever.
Sure. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess it's too easy to say Einstein, right? But to have the kind of mind that just solved problems that were previously unsolvable, also with sort of that humility, humanity, and wit. And I think we could use more people like that in the world. Geniuses with a heart. And I know there are a lot of them out there. I feel like I have the heart. I just like the genius. So that's one possibility. I don't know. A.A. Milne. I don't know anything about A.A. Milne. I just know I love Winnie the Pooh, and I feel like we could use some more Winnie the Pooh stories too. So.
Well, I could keep you here with what ifs all night, and I won't do it. I do appreciate your time, and you've been extremely generous with it. This has been just fantastic. You're going to keep writing books. We should do this again sometime.
Absolutely, yeah.
For tonight, I always try to end with some variation of this question. And that is, if you could go back to the start of your career or whenever it would be useful to you and give yourself some advice that would have made the path easier for you and might make the path easier for all the authors watching or listening to us and subscribing to us, what would you go back and what would you tell yourself?
All right, so this is what I think I would tell myself. I would tell myself that, and this is a quote, maybe it's a Vonnegut quote, I don't know, but this will all be useful to you, right? Whatever it is that you're going through, and maybe this is a function of me being a middle grade author, right? And tapping into the sort of tumultuous, churning, cesspool of emotions that we're all going through as we make that sort of transition to adulthood. But just say, all of this stuff, like if you're going to end up being a writer, like tap into it all. Write it down now, even if it's not in novel form or poetry form or short story form, because all the pain and the joy and all that stuff that you experienced so intensely at that time, it's going to come back. And it's going to provide some outstanding characters and some great conflicts, and some really cool story twists once you can harness that stuff and access it. And the other thing I would say is be more curious. I was an avid reader, and so I learned a lot, obviously, from the books that I read, but I don't know I learned as much from the life that I led that I could have. I was, sort of antisocial and, introverted and preferred to stay in my little cubby and do my thing, as I think a lot of, young writers are. But I think the more you experience of the world from as young age as you can, the richer the worlds that your characters inhabit will be. And I feel like in some ways I've been playing catch up to that as an author. 10 books in now, 11 and 12 coming out, and I'm like, I need to see the world because we can't keep setting every book in some unnamed city in the Midwest. Although I appreciate that I've got my roots established, it would be nice to be a little more worldly. So yeah, be curious, learn as many different things as you can. And if you're a young writer, be a young lots of other things, right? Always write and read, but also be a young explorer and a young scientist and a young engineer, and maybe even for a little while a young doctor or a young lawyer. Learn to cook. I don't know. Take care of animals. Just do other things because writing is about taking experience and giving it meaning, right? By putting it in this form that we call story and narrative. And if you don't have the experience, then I feel like that narrative is kind of empty, right? You can create something wholly formed out of your imagination, but I don't feel like it carries as much emotional weight if you haven't gone out and lived at least part of it. So that would be it. Stay curious, see the world, read, write it down, and know that whatever you're going through, you'll put it on the page eventually and maybe make a little money off of it.
Where can the esteemed audience find you online, follow you on social media, and all that good stuff?
Thanks for asking. I am at www.johndavidandersonauthor.org. www.dondavidanderson.org is the website. And then from there, you can reach me on Twitter, Anderson_author, or you can reach me through email. I keep my social media presence fairly low key, mostly because I don't want to. I shouldn't say that, but the truth of the matter is, like, it's too much. It's too overwhelming for me to keep track of. Twitter's enough. There's enough going on in there to keep me busy for hours and hours. But yeah, I love when young readers write to me. I always write them back. One advantage of not being famous, right, is you have plenty of time to still answer your emails. So if there's anybody out there who likes my novels or doesn't like them and wants to tell me all about it, yeah, I'll even welcome that. So yeah.
Steve Donish, you know who I am. Go to middlegradeninja.com. There are thousands of interviews with authors, editors, agents, all the world's best people. Everything you could ever want to know and more at middlegradeninja.com. Download your free copy of Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Beast. It will change your life. And as always, God willing, I'm alive. I'll see you next week.